Thanks, Bob. This is it. We are 4 days away from knowing which Democrat will face which Republican in the race for governor. The latest polls are all over the place. Most show former Congresswoman Gwen Graham and former Miami Beach Mayor Philip Levine neck and neck. They also show Tallahassee Mayor Andrew Gillum surging. Gillum is barnstorming across Florida, and he joins us now in the studio. Well, what about this, Mayor? Up until now, the race has really been between Gwen Graham, Phil Levine, Jeff Green, but in the last few days and weeks, you have really surged in the polls. It really started with Bernie Sanders coming to Florida to campaign with you. What do you attribute this to?
Well, I tell you, so it was between those other candidates, largely because they were putting a lot of money out there and on television. I think we spent less than 3 or 4 million maybe on television compared to 90 million combined by my opponents on television. So a lot of voters didn't know who I was, didn't know that I was a contender in this race. And now that they're getting to know, and now that we are closer to the point of decision day, people are taking a good hard look and they're deciding that I'm the candidate that they want to represent them in November.
You know, in many cases, the other candidates are wealthy themselves, and they could just put all the money they want in the race. I know that in terms of Gwen Graham, her dad put another $500,000 in the race yesterday, but you have some big money people behind you too.
Yeah.
Tom Steyer, who people will know in terms of doing all those ads calling for the impeachment of the president, and George Soros. Yes. How does that money, over $600,000, help in the last few days of this campaign?
Well, it's important and critical to us in these final days. It is going to allow us to be on television in places where a lot of undecided voters still are. I mean, I literally spent 18 months retailing my way across the state of Florida. No ads, no advertisement, going into places sight unseen and people meeting me for the first time. I'm so honored that so many people have really given me a shot in this race. I've tried to have our voters not have to compromise on quality. I've got more years of public policy making experience than all 4 of my opponents combined. We're the most qualified Democrat competing for the Democratic nomination, and I believe we offer the best chance in November. If a Democrat is going to win, it has to be a nominee who has the ability to pull more black voters, more brown voters, more younger voters, more poorer voters to the poll, and I trust my chances at being able to do that over any Democrat in this race, which is why I think voters are now turning our direction.
You know, I saw a picture in the Tampa Bay Times the other day that kind of was very interesting. The NAACP held a candidates forum last week, I believe, and you were the only candidate to show up there. Are Democrats doing enough to appeal to the minority community? Because we've done a lot of shows here talking about there is an issue in terms of voter turnout.
Yes.
And if you remember Charles Barkley saying after the Alabama Senate race that Democrats can no longer take the African-American vote for granted.
That's right. Well, I tell you, it was a very, very disappointing showing the other day. In fact, I believe 4 of the 5 of us had confirmed to be at that NAACP hosted forum. It was the NAACP, the League of Women Voters, the Junior League of Hillsborough County, and I kept my word because I've said all along that if you want to be governor of the state of Florida, you have to be governor for all the state of Florida. That means you've got to go some places where you may not always feel comfortable. I certainly have. We kicked off our Bring It Home bus tour in Pensacola, Florida, then went down to Panama City, and then over to Marianna, Florida, and all the way across. We believe that we've got to take every voter seriously. And if the Democrats fail to do that, we will once again reap another lost election. And I just refuse to do that.
You know, I know job number 1 here is actually winning the Democratic nomination here, but this is a heavily Republican area here. And if there was one thing that you could say to the Republicans who are watching this right now, what would that be? Well,
it would be, first of all, I want them to vote their own self-interest. If they just voted their own self-interest, they would know that voting for me as a Democrat in November will be in the best interest of them and for the state of Florida.
Why?
We'll expand Medicaid to over 700,000 of those medically needy people in this state. Right now, those of us who are insured are largely paying those bills at the emergency room, which is the most inefficient and most expensive form of care. If you want a governor who's going to accept high-speed rail money when it comes from Washington, D.C., to ensure that we're able to connect the largest growing and fastest growing growing corridors of this state, and someone who's not going to vote ideologically on that, but on what is in the best interest of the people of the state of Florida, then I'm their choice. If they want a governor who is going to do, I believe, what is in the best interest of all the people of this state, then I'm sure they'll choose me.
All right, we have to take a quick break. We'll be back with Democratic gubernatorial candidate Andrew Gillum in a moment. Welcome back. We are talking with Democratic gubernatorial candidate Andrew Gillum. Mayor, I wanted to get to one issue that you've been talking about on the campaign trail, and it's a national issue, and it involves ICE. Yeah. Obviously, we've been dealing with the family separations along the border, and you have joined the chorus in the progressive community calling for getting rid of ICE and coming up with something else. And I have two questions there. Number one, that may work in a Democratic primary, but when you're talking about the general election and trying to win over votes from independents and moderate Democrats, is that really a winning issue, at least in Florida?
Well, let me just say, first of all, I believe in borders, right? I believe in the laws around that. ICE is a relatively new advent. A lot of people think it's existed forever. It didn't. It came along after 9/11, and this president has completely tainted ICE. It has made it a family separation agency, going after mothers and fathers and separating babies from their parents. What I have advocated for is a more humane policy to put it under the Department of Justice, the legal arm of the United States government, stand up a department that is intended to do the right thing, which is to keep our borders safe and to ensure that we have a humane immigration policy here in the state of Florida
and in the country. Isn't the problem here not the agency itself, but the administration and its policy?
Well, it is now the agency, because this agency is now being looked at broadly in not only the U.S. sense, but in the global sense, as a family separation force. That is how this administration is using it. And again, we're not talking about tearing down and having no borders. We're talking about how do we stand up an agency that actually does what it is intended to do, which is to ensure to border control here and to have a humane policy around it. And most importantly, we deserve a federal government that's going to do its job. We send people to Congress, our members of Congress, into the United States Senate to do a job. And part of that job is keeping our border and our country safe. And in my opinion, that means comprehensive immigration reform for 20 million people who are here in this country, undocumented, who deserve some settlement to their status.
But here's the question, from just a purely political, strategic point of view. ICE is not something that you're going to really have to deal with as governor here, so why even get into it, considering the fact that it's just one of those hot-button issues that kind of divides Republicans and Democrats going into a fall election?
Well, I think that it is important that the governor of the state of Florida, one of the most diverse states in the country, has a position on what it means to keep our state safe. We don't think it makes it safer for us to push people who are here in this state undocumented back into the shadows. It is not good for the state of Florida. It is not good for the economy of the state of Florida. It is not good for the people of the state of Florida. And so it's important that we compel on Washington to do their job, which is to see to a immigration policy in this country that, again, keeps us safe and also secures our borders.
Let me ask you about one more issue. That's something that we've been really dealing with here on the Sun Coast. I don't know if you caught a whiff when you were walking into the station, but the rot of dead fish from red tide is probably worse this year than any time in recent memory. There's a lot of talk about what is responsible for it, whether it's pesticides and phosphate, whether it is the green slime from Lake Okeechobee here. Has state policy contributed to the issue that we're dealing with right now?
Sure it has. I mean, the first thing that Governor Rick Scott did when he came into office is he took the protection out of the Department of Environmental Protection. He has handed over in a gift-wrapped box to the largest polluters in this state the ability to run roughshod over our environment. I believe that we deserve a governor who's going to force our largest polluters to do right by the environment. We're going to ensure that we hold sugar accountable and big ag accountable for their contribution to the problem. We're also going to have to convene a much more comprehensive conversation about the future of growth and development in the state of Florida. We can't allow for all the growth that anybody wants to take place on septic tanks, which are reducing nitrates and other toxins into our groundwater, which is contributing to part of this problem. We can't allow for the kind of rampant overgrowth north of Lake Okeechobee, which again is contributing happening to much of the runoff into Lake Okeechobee, and then these discharges, when they take place, are creating the kind of blue-green algae bloom that we see that is corroding our ecosystem, taking out viable sea life, and degrading the quality of life for all of us here in the state of Florida.
We have to leave it here, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.
4 days until the primary.
That's right. That's right.
All right. Good luck, Mayor. Our conversation continues right after we get a check with on the first alert forecast with Chief Meteorologist Bob Harry.